Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan, and it is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Remember to do all the things. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on your favorite podcast app, review the show, give us a rating and a review, and join our Patreon. All this stuff helps so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with Monica Guzmán. Moni Guzmán is Senior Fellow for Public Practice at Braver Angels, host of the podcast A Braver Way, founder and CEO of Reclaim Curiosity, and author of a book that we often refer to on this program, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And perhaps most notably, Moni plays a barbarian named Shadrach in her Besties Dungeons & Dragons campaign. But all of Monica's work is around helping to depolarize America and bridging political divides. I am so grateful to have you back on the program. Moni, how you doing?
I'm doing okay, Corey. Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. I got to see you recently, but I was behind the glass on your visit with our friend Liz Joyner and her organization, Village Square. So it was cool. But now I get to ask you questions and engage with you. So this is really cool. I want to ask my first question again. Not as a greeting, but as a serious, like you've been helping a lot of others process what's been happening during last year's campaign season and then the results of the election. So I really want to know, like, how have you been? How have you been processing all of this?
So you mean in particular the results of the election and everything since, pretty much?
I mean, we could go back to the infamous June debate, like the entire campaign, it's been a lot. It's been a lot. And
it
how
has
have you
been a lot. I've been trying to turn up how much I'm noticing my reaction instead of just, I think I haven't done that very well in the past. So for example, I noticed that even though I did not vote for the winner in this election, and I also did not vote for the winner of the 2016 election, I was a lot more grounded this time. With seeing that result. So I noticed that and I credited it to a lot of the work that I've been doing in between those two elections. I noticed that I did have this instinct that whenever something starts to build up in me as anger, rage, or confoundedness with something going on in our politics recently, it's like I have a radar, like a sensor for when that negative emotion, that anger or that rage or that confoundedness has sort of tipped a little bit too much, like has gotten too big without my talking to someone who's on the other side.
Okay.
So it's like I have this sort of radar of like, you're getting pretty incensed for not having any perspective from the other side. What are you going to do to go get that? And then I go, oh, okay, might be time to, talk to my parents. But more recently, I've just gotten a lot of friends who look at politics very differently in the intervening years. And so I've literally like called them up or texted them and been like, can we talk about this? What do you think about this? So that's been great because basically it's like my temperature goes up, 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 up. And then I get new perspective and it cools down a bit. And I know from a more centered place, what I don't like, but I've checked it. I've checked it with different perspectives and people that I respect. And I'm like, oh, there's this different way of looking at it. So maybe it's not all crazy or whatever. And it just keeps happening over and over again. Right. So that's been a lot of the last few months. And then, of course, as a bridge builder myself, I think people ask me about recent things, sometimes with the expectation that I would have weakened my commitment to bridge building, given what's going on. And just the opposite is true. It's a lot stronger than it's ever been. This sense that no, it's absolutely critical that we connect with folks across the divide. I'm not for myself seeing any reason to stop doing that or to switch, strategies to that degree. So yeah, and of course it's largely folks on the blue side who would ask the question in that way.
So, two questions about that. One is, it sounds like when you find yourself getting ratcheted up, as you describe it, you do what in other fields might be called noting, but in your line of work, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like because you can imagine yourself in the shoes of friends that you've made who have a very different perspective than you, who voted for a different, in this case, different presidential
Mhm.
candidate than you did. And by doing that, by imagining yourself in their shoes, observing your behavior, it's almost like it allows you to not be consumed by that anger or that fear. Is that a fair way to put it? You're kind of uncoiling and just kind of noting it as opposed to being consumed by those.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. And I hadn't thought of it precisely in the way you say, where I'm looking at myself as someone would look at me with that different perspective. But that is part of what's been happening as I've kind of formed deeper relationships with folks. Then I kind of, those questions pop up in my head. What would Travis think of this? What would Elizabeth think of this? Uh, what might they say? What am I missing? What are the other angles? And by the way, like talking to folks who are on the other side also reveals plenty of places with shared outrage. So it's not like it's all different.
Yeah.
It's actually really neat to see, oh yeah, yeah, no, this is the place where we are both worried.
So I have so many questions now. Okay. So what is an example of that where you're both either concerned or outraged with someone in this case who voted for Trump?
Um, Things around the Constitution,
Mm,
just concerns around the structure of government. It's been really neat in the last several months. I've taken more of a deep dive in learning about the Constitution,
yeah.
and it's been great. And I've kind of been like, where was I? What happened to history class? All that like left me, and I never paid this much attention to the Constitution then, and
Yeah.
now I am. And it's so cool. And the founders were so aware of how corrupting power can be that they created a systemic kind of way for everything to check itself. But they also had certain they put in certain things into the design. And the chief thing that outrages me these days, that I have found plenty of conservatives to agree with me on, is Congress.
Mm.
Like
They're just
these are
abrogating their
in so
responsibilities.
many ways, right? So I've talked with, so for example, conservatives I've heard from, um, many of them are angry with Congress, even if they are excited with Trump and the executive branch right now, because they know that governance by executive order is not only not sustainable,
Hmm.
but not representative. It's not sustainable because the next party to get power is just going to undo everything. So what was the point of that? And also, it's not representative. That president is acting kind of on their own volition and on a partisan way. But only when something comes through Congress do we know it's truly representative. And conservatives and liberals across the country, really do respect the democratic republic we're in. So that's been a really great point of common ground. Like a lot of liberals say, Congress isn't doing its job because it's not standing up to the will of the executive. And conservatives say Congress isn't doing its job because it's not trying to make legislation to
Right.
either confirm or modify or get ahead of some of some of these things that the executive is doing very quickly that the culture may really want. Congress has been so slow and dysfunctional for years and years and years and years.
That's
And
right.
so all sides agree on that. That's been one of the most fun revelations of this for me.
Yeah, so there was a fellow on one of the episodes right after the election of A Braver Way, and he is a self-proclaimed, enthusiastic Trump voter. But it was really interesting to hear what specifically he was enthusiastic about. And he looked at Donald Trump as someone who was about as close to a Kennedy Democrat as we've seen on the national stage. In his view, he
Hmm.
also his personal what he valued most highly is what he would call classical liberalism or classical
Hmm.
liberal values. I was curious. I'd be curious to circle back around. I don't remember the fellow's name, but to circle back around with him because some of the actions of the Trump administration here over these first couple months have been a direct attack on First Amendment values, freedom of the press, freedom of redress of grievances, freedom of
Hmm.
assembly, freedom of speech, as well as that balance of power. Like, oh, Congress, that's cute, power of the purse. Yeah, we're going to kind of ignore that, you know. So I'd be
Hmm.
curious to circle back around and see if he said, he said in that panel conversation that, hey, listen, if these things don't align with my classical liberal values, I'll be the first one to stand up.
Hmm.
Not that I want to prove a guy wrong, but
Mm.
it was a different profile of someone who checked that box for that presidential candidate,
Yeah.
and then the way things have actually gone here over these first couple months. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if whether it's a sort of follow-up conversation with that
I mean,
individual.
he's been one of the people in the last few months that I've called just one-on-one to chat,
Yeah.
and it's been great. Also in that episode that you're referring to, his name is Travis. Travis talked about how, in his view, you know how the Democrat side, the blue side, around the election. I mean, both sides were saying this of the other side, but my side, the blue side, was really saying this very strongly that we got to save democracy. That the other side represents a threat. Trump represents a threat to democracy, and in Travis's view, democracy's already been stamped out. Free speech has already been um, just so disrespected. So he sees Trump as someone who's going to bring more of a respect for free speech. So he looks at it in a very different way,
Hmm.
where for him, his views on COVID, for example, and which views the social media platforms did and did not allow to traffic on their sites, and how much that impacted which ideas could be circulated and which couldn't. The ways that, he talks about the executive branch and how big it's gotten, which is one of the things Trump is addressing. So if you're on the right, one of the reasons you'd be really excited about what's going on is because it's a lot easier to add complexity to the government than to subtract it. And there's a lot of folks, the way they see it, and I see the logic in this, there's a lot of folks who work for agencies in the executive branch who end up having a lot of power over the American people, for example, with COVID policy, who were never
Right.
elected. They were never elected. And so there's been a lot of resentment built up over that. So he sees that also as a kind of attack on democracy, because you have a lot of folks who are unelected and aren't working through a representative process like legislators in Congress, who get to make policy that can really impact people and maybe hurt people the way he would see it. Then you're already curtailing, free speech. You're already making a lot of folks unheard and unrepresented. So I think that's what he would say, is that if the assumption is that Trump is attacking free speech in all his actions, he would come in and say, eh, actually, I think some of the things he's doing are actually aimed at liberating some forms of expression that he and other folks who would see things his way think have been threatened for a long time. So it's been really interesting to look at things from that different light, and recognize in myself, I during COVID, for example, I have like a white collar kind of job. I can work from the computer. I can work from anywhere. And there's a lot of ways I did not relate to folks who really couldn't make a lot of money, couldn't keep their livelihoods if they couldn't leave their house. And the ways in which COVID policy really impacted them is a tough thing for us urban liberals sometimes with white collar jobs to reckon with. So anyway, it's been eye opening for me. Um, my politics haven't changed, but I I don't know. It's not as clear cut to me. Um, who's attacking what for which reason?
So that answers another question I had is it definitely sounds like and you've put in a lot of work to better understand folks that you might dispositionally disagree with.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and but have you been persuaded? I guess largely the answer might be no, but in degrees, yes. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I've been persuaded over and over again that positions against mine are not ludicrous, that they actually are coherent, and in some cases, maybe more correct than I think. And it takes spending time in those perspectives and having a lot of humility about what I naturally miss, given who I am and how I flow through the world. Um, so yeah, so for example, just what I just laid out in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I mean, I had a lot of empathy for folks who, came from the other side politically about COVID and had a lot more suspicion and all of that. More recently, it's been more than just sympathy and empathy for those folks. Like,
Mhm.
I think that actually there's a lot that both sides didn't see and that the left side didn't see and really neglected about the on the left we love the term lived experience, the lived experience of a lot of folks who wanted to ask a lot of questions about what was going on and kept feeling like they were not allowed to and they were made to feel very stupid, and it wasn't right. I really think that wasn't right. And so having gone through that transformation in myself um, makes me wonder what else I am misperceiving, because of, the positions I have and the different lives that other people have.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I have close friends who voted differently than I did, at least at the top of the ticket. I had one of my kids felt very differently about vaccines, for example, and masks. So there are people I love that I don't want a decision or a position to get in the way of our relationship.
Mhm.
And in fact, I want to understand it better because I want to see where my blind spots are. However, you said that it's healthy to come to the conclusion that this position or this decision is not ludicrous. However, do you have boundaries? Are there limits to that?
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
grappling with it. I'll just to give you context. I've been grappling with this. I hate unfriending people, whether it's like officially on
Yeah.
the social media thing or distancing myself. But there have been three instances here over the last year and a half, where I do what's called I still love you, but I'm going to love you from a safe distance.
Yep. Yep.
Have
I
you?
like that.
But I can't even define when it is. I just recognize it when I see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you
That's it.
defined that for yourself, or?
That's it. Um, I think that's so interesting, and I've thought about this more and more recently because I am afraid, and I've been afraid since I started doing this work, that I am completely wrong. That when people say that doing bridge building work distracts you from the work that you ought to be doing, which is more about advocacy and attack of the opposition, obviously the work that I do would really encourage me to find arguments against that.
Yeah.
But I've always wondered if I'm completely wrong. How would I know? How would I know, right? When more understanding is not going to illuminate things, when no, actually something about this is crystal clear, and now it's time to take an action rather than just have a dialogue, right?
Hmm.
And so when would that moment come? I just recently had a fantastic long phone conversation with a fellow bridge builder. She's amazing. And we both were kind of wrestling with that with each other. How would we know? What would be that moment? And we talked about some of our concerns about the overall thing. And I think the thing I'm most scared of is that I what if I am so hesitant to be too certain about things that I wouldn't know a clear line when I saw one.
Hmm.
And that's a fear of mine. So I guess I'm kind of taking that as a form of vigilance. Like, I kind of believe that when you are worried about something, then you're probably looking out for it. But here's the other thing. I see a lot of folks drawing those lines pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Cutoffs within families and friendships are spiking again. No
Yeah.
surprise. They're mostly initiated by the blue side, which has always been true. And so we're seeing that more and more. And I certainly don't want to go too far on that side either.
Yeah.
Because that is too often a reflex, and it is far too often an excuse. And people make their judgments and make their calls and draw those lines just too easily without stepping into the other perspective to see again that not only is it not ludicrous, there might be something to learn here, yo.
Yeah.
Are we sure about this? And yeah, I think one of the major things that I see people so afraid of is, that it's all falling apart, that there's threats and attacks to really, really important pieces of our government, which may be true. That may be true, but I don't want to feel too confident about that if I'm too siloed around that conversation. I refuse to do that.
Yeah.
So do I have boundaries? God, I hope so.
Hmm.
But I can't name them for you right now. And I it's a little bit like you said, I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah.
I am afraid that I won't. I am. But
So
I hope that that vigilance means that I will.
I could give you a couple of examples that I'm still pretty sure were the correct calls in the instance. So I grew up in an observant Jewish family going to an Orthodox synagogue before I became a Christian. But I have family in Israel. So one of those instances, a heated conversation about what's happening in Israel got so heated that this person told me that I'm essentially an anti-Semite if I don't support Trump. And I wasn't going to hear it from my Goyish friend telling me, that I was an anti-Semite, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was one where it's like, dude, this is
No.
not going to go anywhere good.
Yeah.
Another one was recent where I forget what the initial conversation. I curate conversations
Right.
too. So somebody, oh gosh, I forgot what it was, but somebody said he's our president and he deserves respect.
Yeah.
And another friend said he's a convicted rapist. He deserves none of my respect. And
Mhm.
then the person interjected and he said, well, that's just a lie. That's a bald-faced lie. And she said, slow down, slow your roll there, buddy. I happen to be a survivor of sexual assault. And and I was like, all right, dude, here's
Mm.
not the place where we're gonna make real clear nuanced differences between adjudicated sexual offender or and convicted rapist. This is not the place. He
Mhm.
kept on and kept on. I said, all right, dude, this is we're going to cut this conversation off.
Mhm.
However, there is one that I'm starting to question. I have a loose rule where I say in these conversations that we curate, um, uh, I forgot how it's worded, but basically proven falsehoods. Proven falsehoods will be muted. Like I don't want to continue to fight, the big lie, the 2020 election was stolen thing. But I'm beginning to question whether I should leave some of those comments up there. If I should allow some of that to. I'm not as certain about muting those comments
Mm.
because I equate it with like, listen,
Mm.
if you want to talk about Earth is flat or the moon is made of cheese, fine, just not here. But
Mm.
I don't know if I should equate, just by saying the 2020 election
Yeah.
stolen whatever theories is like the flat earthers is maybe not fair. So that's where I'm starting to question it.
Yeah. Wow, you brought up three really interesting scenarios there. And now I'm understanding a little of your kind of on-ramp onto this. So in a couple of the scenarios, it seems to me like the step you took was one of, okay, this is, things are not gonna be productive beyond this point, but you engaged in across differences up to a point.
Up to a point.
And folks really did, get to see pieces of each other's perspective. In the case of somebody saying to you, you're an anti-Semite if you don't support Trump. Um, that's very interesting because it speaks to something in you and an identity in you. So that's very difficult to stand above, kind of get above that and kind of be meta and a little bit distant. That
Yeah.
can be really difficult in the moment.
Yeah.
First of all, um, I think it is possible to be curious about that. I recently talked to this bridge builder who I'm so inspired by. His name is Ryan Nakade. And this was a quote that came out of his mouth. He said, what did he say? Oh, how did he put it? It was something like, oh, if they say racist things to me, that's great. That's who I want to talk to. And I was like, whoa. He's a remarkable person. He
That's
has
like Daryl
made
Davis. Like he
it is.
just sends himself into the fire.
Yes,
Let's do it,
exactly.
baby.
He really connects with Daryl Davis. He grew up in a Buddhist monastery. He has a pretty strong sense of internal resilience so that he wants people to call him names. Why? Because he finds it fascinating to then he won't react. He won't react negatively.
Yeah.
He knows that about himself. So he finds it fascinating, like, yes, yes, call me names, yell at me, because then I'll come in and I'll start asking you questions, and you will have to face whatever it is in you that wants you to yell at me. You don't know me, you know? So, boy, now that's pretty supreme. That's pretty,
Yeah.
pretty superlative. But
Yeah.
what it demonstrates to me is if one person can do it, can do that, can the rest of us do a little more than what we think we're capable of, is sort of the end message. But I do believe that not only is it possible to be curious even in those situations, but it's
Yeah.
extremely illuminating. You know, when somebody gets to that point of, you're an anti-Semite if you don't support Trump. Whoa, where did that come from where it was so strong? I want to know the stories. I want to know what they've seen that led them to that got them to be that firm. I find that interesting. Now, that person may not want to share with me, and I, for sure, if I have the identity that they're talking about, I may not be interested in listening. But at least in this sort of meta level, boy, is that interesting. So that's one. And you talked about, tell me more about this. You facilitate, you moderate conversations. You have been muting any comments about the 2020 election.
Well, the
Because
rule.
proven falsehoods are muted. That's the policy. But now you're wondering if you should let some of them go through.
Yeah,
Did I get that right?
I'm questioning my own judgment about what are proven falsehoods. Like, I didn't want to continue having debates about vaccines.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want to air conspiracy theories.
Right.
But I question my own ability to be the judge of that,
Yeah.
as well as, and let's say I am wrong about one of these. I make
Yeah.
an error in judgment. Is the damage that I do in terms of someone's perception of freedom of speech,
Yeah.
that am I doing more damage to their perception of this forum as a
Yeah.
forum to exercise our freedom of speech and our freedom of engagement,
Right.
freedom to engage, and the democratic process. It's a, negotiated process, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm
Oh, that's
ambivalent
so
about
good.
that rule,
Yeah. Well, I think that's absolutely fascinating. And moderators and facilitators, we've been scratching our heads on this for so long. Everyone's just trying to do their best to minimize harm in a lot of cases. We're trying to minimize harm. So, fun fact about me, I'm, been a journalist for a long time. And I was on the Society of Professional Journalists ethics committee for a while, and we ended up doing this pretty big revision of the Society of Professional Journalists ethics code, which is used by a lot of news organizations everywhere. And so, boy, did I spend a lot of time thinking about that principle of minimizing harm in the ways that journalists cover stories, how they treat sources, how you check for accuracy, and how you behave ethically around folks. It was just like a big part of my journalism work was all of that. And so, coming back here, I think it is really important to invite the doubt in these exact scenarios that you're talking about. You said something really interesting. I'm not sure I should be the judge. That's really interesting. Who can be the judge of what a proven falsehood is? So I have all kinds of questions. What if discussion about something attached to or in the universe of what is conceived of as a proven falsehood is also the way in which this person wants to explore and explain a deep concern? Um, what if the things that are perceived as harmful by one side in terms of an idea are just not only not perceived as harmful but by the other side, but are perceived as being really important and undercounted? And where does power come in? It's really, really, really hard. I have learned a principle that I think is really interesting that I never learned while I was in journalism, but I learned from Braver Angels, is basically police the structure, not the content. Police the structure, not the
Okay.
content.
Okay.
So we have all kinds of ways in Braver Angels debates, which are these really cool virtual experiences where we tackle the most divisive things you can imagine. We just had a debate on birthright citizenship. We're having debates on Trump's first 100 days right now. Yeah, I mean, for example, we have a structural thing where when you ask questions of someone who's just given a speech in the affirmative or the negative on the debate resolution, they have to address the chair. They can't address the person who just spoke. They can't say, you, why do you think that? So immediately when we're trained to be debate chairs, you have to immediately stop that person. As soon as they say the word you, no, the speaker. As soon as if their question is out of scope, if they're not asking a question, if they're just launching insults, can you get to a question here? It sounds like you have a concern. Can you get to a question? We police the
Mm.
structure, not the content. So believe it or not, like people can say anything. Uh, they really can. But it has to be a question. It has
Yeah.
to be a speech in the affirmative or the negative, and it has to fit into those spaces.
Yeah.
Uh, and that turns out to be enough. And so we've had people do speeches on things that many would consider to be conspiracy theories, and they're heard. And then the next speaker speaks against what was just said with their own story. And if in the case of what's viewed as conspiracy theories, very often the other speeches just seem to have a lot more evidence to them,
Yeah.
right? So, but we don't go, conspiracy theory, shut up. No, we
Okay.
don't do that. We don't do that. And I'm not saying that's easy, and I think it's particularly difficult next to impossible in text forums when it's not
Right.
people using their voice.
Right.
I don't even, ugh, I can't imagine. It's just really hard because you can't read intent the same way. And you could have trolls and people speaking in bad faith, and then what?
Right. Yeah, I do try to curate who's speaking in these forums because a lot of them are text. It's hard. There are certain forums and platforms where it's harder. YouTube, for example, it's harder to curate who's speaking and who's commenting. But most of the other platforms, it is easy to at least curate who's on there
Yeah,
by at least one common connection, that being me or the show or whatever.
yeah,
Um, it's interesting because to your point, I have discovered opportunities within the whole big lie stolen election thing. And that is to start to find points of agreement. So, for example,
yep,
I think folks that I have had these conversations with have been surprised about where I create a distinction. One distinction is even though I disagreed with the premise of why a lot of people were at the Stop the Steal rally, I strongly, firmly, deeply believe and would defend the right for people to peaceably assemble, right to free
definitely.
speech and all that.
Right,
Where I disagree, but there's a line between the folks who are peaceably assembled and the
right,
folks who went and stormed the Capitol. So
right.
there is an opportunity there if I allow, right?
Yeah.
Here I am sort of patronizing, like in a patronizing way. But you also said something really interesting. You said that you feel even stronger that to work harder at these bridge building conversations. Now,
Yeah.
do you have to work harder because bridge building has become more difficult?
Yeah.
Or is it just a different is there a different sense of urgency that you've gained through building these muscles over the years?
I think it's both. I think
Okay.
it's definitely both. It is that I think it's true that right now, because it feels so much harder to so many people since the election, then it effectively is harder. I
Mm,
mean, all it has to be is it's about how we each feel and perceive, because this is really about how we behave and how we treat each other. So how we feel about each other is everything. So yeah, if it feels harder, then it is. And it,
yeah.
it certainly feels harder to a lot of people. So then I guess it's harder. But having to work harder on it because of a renewed sense of urgency, 100,000%. In my recent reading and kind of like nerdy study of the founding documents and the Federalist Papers and all of that, I really geeked out around the extent to which the founders really tried to make sure that there were ways to achieve steadiness, especially in the transition of power, because we wouldn't have a king for a lifetime. We would have presidents who needed to go, change up, and we would have elections. And in many countries, that's annoying. I mean, gee, now you have to switch governments. That's a pain in the butt. And then what if people don't like it and all of that? So they really tried to work in steadiness. And so to compare the design of the executive branch with the reality and just be like, every election is just whiplash to this country. And this latest one, boy, boy,
Yeah.
that is one big, like all of a sudden things are like this and now they're like this. That's wacky. And it reflects a sense of, to me, it comes so much from our polarization and the toxicity in our polarization because we just, when one side takes power, they want to undo everything that the other side did. And that's partly because apparently what the other side didn't persuade anybody. you know? And why didn't it persuade anyone? Maybe because we're not talking to each other. I don't know. Maybe because we've stopped trying. Maybe because we're mostly shaming and condescending and hating on everybody. Maybe that doesn't work. Maybe that's actually really dumb. Just, I mean, there's, and I don't mean to dismiss, like, I know how that can sound, but I don't mean to dismiss. Look, there's plenty of times in our history, and maybe we are in one now, where, it's time to just like put down the mic and get more serious about something. But I don't want to think that we're at a point of war. I don't want to think that. I don't think it's true. I don't see enough evidence for it. I think some people do, and they're already seeing, this maps right onto this dictator. This maps right onto the authoritarian playbook, and therefore we gotta do something different. But I would say even in the case that it does map onto those things in some way, can we combine action with dialogue, please?
So
please.
You did, or I think somebody was quoting you. Actually, you know what? It was on a Substack I was reading. Across Differences. Beth Mallow has this great Substack called Across Differences, and she was talking about you. She said, here's a quote. Monica said that dialogue without activism can be like navel gazing, excessive self-contemplation, and intellectual exercise. Yet activism without dialogue, it's reckless, uninformed, and doomed to fail. What do you mean in this instance by activism?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being very clear about the scenarios that I've heard others paint, that kind of gets, folks' pulse up. But I don't know. I suppose listeners can kind of fill in the blanks with their own nightmare scenarios.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that makes folks really wonder if the only response is what they think of as activism, and activism in the way that it's typically conceived of is not largely about dialogue. It's largely about mobilization. It's largely about campaigning for something. It's largely about taking to the streets, figuring out what the tactics ought to be. Is it disruption? Is it protest? Is it, one way or another, it is action that can pierce political reality and do it quickly, right? There's a sense of that. And so that's what I think the conventional understanding of activism is. But I don't think even I don't think that model of activism can be effective in a divided world if it is not making space and leaving energy for dialogue somewhere. And the main reason for that is all the research shows us how prevalent misperceptions and exaggerations are across the divide.
Right.
All the research shows us over and over and over and over again. When you are in the position of focusing mostly on mobilization, and chances are you are somebody, therefore, who is really activated by a certain cause or an issue, which is great. We need that. But what we also know from the research is that the folks who are most partisan on issues may also be the most emotionally activated, may also be the ones who will be the most misinformed about what the other side thinks. They might also be the ones for whom the slogans aren't just a way of summing up a nuanced truth, but actually are the nuanced truth. There is no more. You know what I mean? It is easier to fall prey to oversimplification when you're more emotionally activated and when you are more siloed in certain channels. And when you're really, fighting for a cause, you are going to be really vulnerable to misperceptions. So it is so important for you, if you want to change the world, to make sure that you go against some of those instincts to check your understanding of the opposition with the reality. You have to do that. And I don't think you can do that by reading the news. That doesn't work.
Are you worried that this isn't a David and Goliath thing? This is just a spitting in the wind thing? Like, because there are so many, there's so much working against us. There's been 40 years of acculturation, in my case, in the church, of perceiving the other in a certain way, perceiving anyone on the outside or, in a certain way. And now there's a whole infotainment
Yeah,
ecosystem
it's
that's
terrible.
building this stuff in. Do bridge builders have any chance?
Oh, it's a punch to the gut what you just said because that's there's this is such an uphill battle on so many fronts.
Listen, I'm 275 episodes into this thing, so clearly I'm either a fool or a dreamer or some
I
combination of
know.
both, man. So
Oh man, Corey, I know. No, this is the thing. This is the thing, right? Like the force with which conflict ridden, dopamine delivering, adrenaline rushing
yeah,
narratives
yeah, yeah,
get out there and get believed. And again, it's not like they're all false. They're not, but they're often, downplaying something important or choosing not to look at something that would really help us get cooler heads and therefore, I don't know, solve things.
yeah.
Um, the force of that. And look, like I've been in media for a long time, like I said, and I know this works. Like actually one of my jobs in journalism, I don't think of this proudly, but for about a year, my job was really almost exclusively to get more hits than the other guy. It's a long, sad story. It was just that specific. There was like no shame to it, and there should have been. And I figured out how to do it. I learned how to write headlines
Yeah.
that could beat, at that time it was like the Huffington Post was getting a lot of traffic. I could write the headline on sort of a viral copy paste story that anybody could write as long as they were at a desk long enough and they knew what they were doing
Yeah.
without doing any actual original reporting, just copy pasting enough of the things and then write the headline so that mine would get the attention. And so my website got most of the hits. I know how to do that. Um, it's terrible. It's terrible. But that's what it is. Attention is so important, and it's more important than anything else in
So
media.
I do think that a lot of folks want to be well informed,
Yeah.
but even as consumers, we're fighting an uphill battle. So you mentioned that you're part of a committee or a commission
Mhm.
of journalistic ethics.
I
So
was, yeah, formally,
okay,
yes.
so as consumers, what are some markings that we can help be discerning for our own information and news and analysis gathering? In other words, like what is good journalism? What are
Yeah.
3 or 5 things that we can look for? Like, oh, okay, this is good reporting right here.
Oh yeah. I mean, Isaac Saul of Tangled News says this as well,
He's
but
coming
if
on the
in the
program in a couple of weeks, actually.
good, he's
Yeah,
he's the
yeah.
master of this. If in the first six paragraphs you're still only hearing about one side, really,
Mm,
of something contentious,
yeah,
that's probably not the article that's going out of its way to try to deliver something nuanced. Um, I see a lot of very emotionally written stories, that just play off as news, but boy, that stuff looks trashy to me,
mm,
where they just immediately like, instead of just saying President Trump or former President Biden, they just like slip in an insult as a modifier to that. Get out of there. That's not
okay.
no, get out of there. You don't need that. Nobody needs that. I mean, a lot of it for me is just what's around that story. If somebody sends me a story and okay, well, what's this website, right? Then I'll go to the website and I'll just take a look at the whole vibe. And sometimes you can just tell that the point of a particular outlet is not to have constructive conversations or to make good sense of the world, but mostly to reflect and affirm a particular point of view. Now, that's really hard for people to distinguish because for a lot of people, a particular point of view is merely true and therefore correct. And, it's okay to have advocacy journalism. That's not a problem. But I love what I learned. I heard about this years ago that it's like a storied kind of legend, and I forget where it's from, but the editor of some alternative weekly, probably in California, telling a reporter who went up to that editor and said, "Hey, I want to do this story on this thing, and I want to do it from this lens. Like, I want to argue for this thing." And the editor said, "I'm not going to let you write any advocacy story until you have spent like as much time with the other side, like until you thoroughly understand the other side, and you can come to me and explain in as generous terms as you can
Yeah.
what's going on that side, then I'll let you write a commentary. I'll let you write an opinion piece. And I think let's skip that part. So I'm pretty sure that's not a very, you know, yeah, I don't think a lot of people are holding each other's feet to the fire who write stories to, do you fully and generously understand the other side here?
Right.
No. What you're doing is in 30 minutes, you're knocking out some opinion piece that's going to get clicks.
Yeah.
That's trash. That's trash.
You,
Don't read it.
you know what I loved about, you were on Yasha Monk's podcast recently. What I loved about his, I think it was fall of 2023, his book, The Identity Trap, came out.
Yeah,
One of the things I loved about that book was that he started each section by fairly and thoroughly articulating the positions of other scholars and writers and thinkers that he was going to then interact with.
exactly.
And I thought it made his arguments that much more robust. EJ
Exactly.
Dionne has done that for 40 years plus.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I
And
was, go
can I
ahead.
really quickly counter my own argument? Because
Sure.
here's where I would say, no, Monica, that's an unrealistic prescription to give to people to avoid those articles. Because I've read some of those kinds of articles that people have written with really great, like, summaries of the other side, and it can take a long time to create.
Sure.
And the truth is that we want to have conversations where we see our rage and our reaction reflected back to us faster than that. And so no wonder
Mm,
there's a marketplace for, I just want to connect with someone else who feels the same way I do. And maybe that's not so bad. It's not. It's a part of it. So now
yeah.
I'm kind of editing my thing going,
There's a
it's
place
just a
for it.
mix. There's a
Yeah.
place for it.
Yeah.
Maybe just like make sure it's not all you're getting.
I haven't, I'm so curious about, I'm imagining young Monica, and I'm wondering, at what point did you begin to realize that this work was so important to you? Like, were you 18? Were you 22?
Mm.
Were you even younger than that at your grandma's big table? When you
Yeah.
realized connecting across our differences, bridge building is really, really important to you.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a moment right now. I think it was a slow burn. And I do think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that from when I was like 5, 6 years old, I lived in a country I didn't understand, where people didn't have to ask me questions,
Hmm.
but I had to ask them questions.
Oh,
I had to ask questions of this world that was new to me all the time. I had to learn a new language and try to master it. I had to figure out these different norms and things. And so, for the first several years of that, I just felt like I needed to kind of be quiet and cautious and all of that. But over time, I got more confident about, yes, I may be different and I may be a kind of minority, but I have a lot to share. And
okay.
and the fact that I come from a different country, a different way of viewing things, I started to realize it can add a lot of really fun complexity to the way that the, native born mostly Irish Catholic folks who went to my Catholic school in New Hampshire, and Caucasian, most of them. I was the only Hispanic, like the whole building. Yeah, that it turned out like the things that I held as different were interesting. They were, and it was great. And then I realized, like, oh yeah, where is everybody else's difference? And it was everywhere. It was crawling out their ears. Every person,
Yeah.
they could all be the same race. Who cares? They're all super different. And there's a lot of ways that I felt similar to them and a lot of ways that I felt different to them. And we liked different things. And some of us wore Zodiac shoes and some of us wore Charlotte Hornet starter jackets and some of us wore Falcon starter jackets. And, and some of us just like behaved a certain, and it's just a parade of humanity. I don't know. And then by the time that I did my first journalism internship, which was unpaid at New Hampshire Public Radio, I fell in love with helping somebody else excavate what makes them interesting. There's so many people I think walk around thinking they're boring,
Mhm.
and they are so wrong. Everyone is so interesting. So it's kind of that. Um, it's just sad to me when we miss so much because we tell ourselves stories that keep the real stories out.
Right.
And that's awful. That's a tragedy to me.
So we're starting to wind down on our time here, but I do want to ask you some practice questions. So what you just alluded to, a lot of questions come with what you would call baggage. You referred to it about a month ago in a talk at Dartmouth, trying to pin you into a corner or judging or leading questions or interrogation type questions.
Mhm.
Do you have ways of disarming or not disarming the question? Maybe that is right. Disarming the questioner or maybe disrupting the interrogation in those instances. And if you do,
Mhm.
like, yeah, how do you
Can
do it?
you can you draw out a little more like about what that instance looks like?
So I've recognized that the way that it's really sad, but sometimes I have to learn how to do this in the most painful way possible. So a
Mhm.
lot of conversations I get to a point where I basically just get knocked out. And usually I'm knocking myself out by making some big, terrible mistake that I really regret,
Yeah.
but it gets me thinking for weeks and weeks and weeks, like, what did I do wrong there?
Mhm.
And one way is that I allowed myself to get caught not in a series of true care oriented questions, right? But in interrogations that are leading me to a certain point. Like they're sort of qualifying me or disqualifying me. Well, you're not really a Christian because X, Y, and Z. They ask you two or
Right.
three questions.
Oh,
So
yes. Yes.
is it something where you just recognize it when it's happening and
Yeah.
then you come back with another question, kind of the way that Jesus often did when he was asked an
That's
interrogative
right.
question?
Yeah.
Or are there other tools in your toolbox where you can kind of shift the
Yeah.
conversation into something more truly conversational?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think if I understand you right, right, you're asking about sometimes I think our conversations we end up in these deep dark tunnels
Yeah.
and we can only move one way and it's not productive. Um, I remember somebody telling me about a conversation they had with their dad and the conversation like started very interesting and then ended up in this place where the son was telling the father, um, see, Dad, you say you're conservative, but you're actually progressive because of this. And the dad was saying, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. It's like that is not a productive. No, no, no.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
just be going, no, no, here's what I think progressive is, and you have it. And so therefore you must acknowledge. I think a lot of those kinds of tunnels that start getting really um just come from people being, I don't know, pretty certain about certain things. And they've just said like A equals B, and I've seen A and so B. And I need you to acknowledge that A equals B. And then you just kind of go on. And I think the thing to do, it's a Socratic thing. Does it?
Yeah.
And you can't just say it that way, usually. Like, of course I am. You're not
Yeah.
going to get
Yeah.
any more of
Yeah.
that. But there's other ways that you can introduce doubt. One of my favorite is just to tell a story, tell the surprising story. My friend Angel Eduardo talks about this, where if you know someone who doesn't fit that profile, if you know a story, you know of a person, some situation where A doesn't equal B, you bring up that situation, but be careful. Don't bring up that situation as the final word. As like, see, A didn't equal B over here, because then they'll say, but generally A equals B most of the time. You're just it's like step out of the argument. Step out of the argument and just, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right about that. I know this person and it this and this happened. And I don't know, it doesn't seem that true for them. And this word honestly means a very different thing for me. But I see that you look at that differently. I think a lot of times when people hear from you that it's that they are accepted by you for thinking about things differently, they'll
Mhm.
really get their guard down and they're a lot more likely to concede uncertainty. But they won't concede uncertainty if it's a you versus me. They will concede uncertainty if you say, you know, you can believe what you want to believe. Like it doesn't seem that way to me, and I know this counterexample, and everything kind of softens. And
Yeah.
in that place, like, yeah, people will be like, yeah, okay, sure. But yeah.
So I want to be respectful of your time because you have kid obligations. So I
Yeah.
need to ask this question. You have two kids, right?
Yep.
How old are the kids?
12 and 10.
12 and 10. Okay. So um, having been a parent or
Mhm.
still a parent, uh,
It's a job you don't leave,
right,
is
right,
my
right.
understanding.
When my kids were that age, boy, oh boy, did I have to do some bridge building. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know how your kids are, but like I'm wondering if you've been in rooms where you have some strong Trump supporters and strong Kamala supporters in this last election. Was it harder in those rooms or in the room with your two kids when they were at each other's throat over whatever, who's going to have the purple spoon?
It's a great question. My kids. My
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely my kids. Because even in the rooms that I've been in with Trump supporters and Biden supporters, whoever happens to be Kamala supporters, they've come into that room understanding
Yeah.
what's going on.
Yeah.
And so with a bit of adult maturity and even a little bit of fear, guarding their behavior. My kids have none of that. Plus, in that room with my kids, I am clearly the person in power.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I'm pretty afraid of overstepping, right?
Mm,
I've got so much power over them that if I choose not to listen, then that's the end of that. So it's so much more important what I do in that scenario because I'm the mother, I'm the parent, I have a role to play.
yeah.
But yeah, an interesting question.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Okay, two more questions and we'll wrap
Yeah.
up. This is the TPNR question. We've kind of been talking about this the entire time, which, by the way, you
Mm.
described a story when you were a young reporter where you always came like with pages and pages of notes and questions, and you ask a question and you look at your notes and you ask the next question.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to any of my questions.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, but
That's okay.
okay, so the TPNR question is, what do
Yeah.
you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So that's people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do
Mhm.
better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
Yeah. Oh, that is the question. Um, what's coming up for me now is can each of us have some faith in our own constitution? Meaning, if I am interacting, engaging with someone who is of a different faith and it really matters to me, or a different political view and it really matters to me, can I believe that that other person's having a different idea does not do anything to my ability to have my own idea? That there is no stain or taint, that engagement is not endorsement,
Hmm.
that we're having a conversation.
Interesting.
We're having a conversation.
Right, right.
I am not capitulating. I am not resigning myself by asking questions
Yeah,
instead of choosing to pour onto you everything I believe. Can we believe that?
right.
That I am who I am before this conversation and after and during. And so therefore, let's explore. Let's
Yeah,
explore. What would that mean? How freeing might that be? And these are questions because I have no answers. Everyone has to figure that out for themselves. But might there be spaces where that can peel open the kinds of possibilities that you didn't think were in front of you? Um, what threat is there? What threat is there really?
yeah. That's interesting. I had conversations along these lines just in the last week or two with friends of mine who voted for Kamala or
Yeah.
are staunchly Democratic, um, about Gavin Newsom having Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk on a show.
Right.
And it was about platforming. I said, Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk don't need Gavin Newsom for a
No.
platform,
Yeah,
you
it's not
know?
that. Yeah.
There are some interesting conversations around that. Do you have any questions for me?
Oh, I mean, what is what is the question keeping you up at night these days about bridge building?
Um, it's it's more the internal battle, right? And trying not to catastrophize, trying to stay with, because there's a lot to be concerned about that's actually happening right now.
Yeah. Oh
To your
yeah.
point about the balance of power, co-equal branches of government, actual material attacks on First Amendment freedoms, um, but trying not to think that go, 100 steps ahead, trying not to shake my fist at these big faceless institutions and, oh, it's the media. Oh, it's the, deep
Mhm.
state. Oh, it's the, but to stay true to what's in front of me, and stay committed to relationships with people that are very different from me on any given issue or just
Mm-hmm.
altogether, right?
Mm-hmm.
And can I do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not without losing my mind. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because I can tweak, man. I can really start to spiral.
Yeah. Same.
So
Yeah. I hear you. And honestly, like I think people think that the call here, to be really courageous is to be a Daryl Davis or a Ryan Nakade and kind of
yeah,
do the most extreme thing, cross the biggest bridge you can think of. And honestly, I think in a moment like this, it takes enough courage for many people just not to burn a bridge
yeah,
that they would otherwise burn. Just just don't talk to that person for as long as you want, but at least don't tell them you want nothing to do with them.
yeah,
That that can take enough courage and that can do enough good at a time when a lot of folks are just burning bridges left and right. So yeah, don't sell yourself short.
yeah.
Like these things don't have to be giant steps. They can be quite small. Find your edge, push it. That's it.
Yeah. Well, a little happy ending about the
Mm-hmm.
guy that I blocked for the better part of 6 or 9 months. He approached me after some time had passed, and we've renewed a friendship. We
Whoa.
spent like 3 hours one night hanging out and better understanding each other. What he said, there were some
Amazing.
things he didn't know. Like I had one of my cousins, it turned out that died on October 7th. So he didn't
Oh,
know how personal
oh
of a
man.
thing that was for us. Um, but just the fact that we could reconnect and that he gave some space and some time with the
Wow.
express intent of just better understanding each other. Sorry, I realized I've gone way
Wow.
over time here. Um,
That's okay.
before we say so long, how can folks follow you, find more information about Braver Angels, A Braver
Mhm.
Way, Reclaim Curiosity, and all the great work that you're doing?
All that stuff. So braverangels.org, lots going on right now. We're diving right into Trump's first 100 days
Yeah,
and the real debates out there. We're having them. Like
yeah,
join us. It's it's really something. And then for me and my book, moniguzman.com, you'll find me at Moni Guzman on some social media platforms, though I've been a little quiet lately. I
yeah.
will I will come back, I promise.
Got to know your limits. Got to know.
Yeah, exactly.
We covered a lot. Is there anything important we haven't discussed that you'd like to add?
No, I love podcasts because there's just no other medium where I feel like I can explore the
Yeah,
bright and the dark even inside me. And I think
yeah.
that's really fun.
It's
So
great.
thanks to your listeners for helping you create a space where people can come in and just be who they are in that moment. It's really
This is
nice.
this is really terrific, Monty. I get to listen to you all the time, but I don't always get to ask you direct questions like this. This has been a real treat for me. So
Yay.
thanks for coming on and spending some time with us.
You bet. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely. And as always, if you dig what we're doing, remember to follow the show, write the review, and all the things. All of our links and how you can find us will be in our show notes. And your support really does make a difference. So thank you for all of it. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.